Last year, the Oilers and Panthers went 7 games into the Stanley Cup Final. Two teams' fates ultimately separated by just 1 goal. Now, 30 games into the new season plus, they're both exactly sitting on 38 points to speak to where they were and where they are now. Here's Mike Johnson. MJ, who's the better team right now? The defending champs or the runners-up?
Right now, I would say the better team is the Florida Panthers. Yes, they're maybe not quite as good as last year. But when you think about the core guys that remain, the guys that are the identity of that team, that play the way that that team has to play to be successful, all those guys are back. All those guys in the prime of their careers, all those guys have been to the mountaintop and have gone back to the final and understand the process that it takes to get there. And I think when you just think about Barkov and Reinhart and Tkachuk and Verhaeghe and Ekblad and Forsling and Bobrovsky, like that core, even though pieces around them are not quite as good, that core is enough to take you a very long way with Paul Maurice at the helm. So right now, I think by a little bit, just a little bit, Gino, I would give the nod to Florida, to that they are slightly better than Edmonton Oilers.
All right, let's look at the Oilers then. Cap issues, offer sheets, signings, trades. The Oilers team has seen a lot of change. Forget the comparison to the Panthers now. Are the Oilers themselves better or worse than they were when they shook hands with Florida at the end of last year's Cup Final?
So, Gino, where they are better is that they are experienced in going the distance. They know what it takes to get all the way to the Stanley Cup Final. They know what it feels like to play in those situations, and that experience will prove to be very valuable. But that does not make up for the losses to the roster that they felt so far this year. For that reason, I think they're not quite as good today as they were when they finished the season last year. I think the offer sheets you mentioned, I think Broberg, I think Holloway, I think McLeod, I think Evander Kane. The speed that those guys brought to the team that could play with some of the higher-end players added a real element beyond McDavid, Draisaitl, Hyman, Nugent-Hopkins that was necessary for Edmonton to get all the way to the Stanley Cup Final. Now, they've tried to address it. Podkolzin's come in, Kapanen's come in. They realize they're a little bit deficient in that area. And when the year is over, they won't look like this team. They'll be better than they are today because they have cap space and maybe a healthy Evander Kane coming back at some point, which will make a big difference. But today, I think they're slightly less effective, not quite as good because of the departures of their depth. Yes, McDavid. Yes, Draisaitl, incredible players. But I don't think they're quite as deep and not quite as good.
I want to drill down on one guy in particular. After a ridiculous 54 goals last year and just 3 goals in the first 20 games this year, Zach Hyman's now got 5 in his last 5. Is this just a hot streak for him, or is Hyman regaining the form that he had that set career highs last season?
No, Gino, this is riding the ship. I think the slow start was not a reflection of the way he plays. I think this goal a game is probably not exactly where he ends up, but when you look at the underlying numbers for Zach Hyman, he was still producing a boatload of high danger chances. His expected goal numbers, even when he wasn't scoring, were very, very strong. Now, was he going to score 50 goals again? It might have been just one of those magical years where he doesn't quite score that much, but this is far more representative, the recent hot run, of who he is as a player. He should push into the 30s and around 40 because of who he plays with, because of the responsibility on the power play to be a goal scorer guy in front of the net there. I think this is a little bit of the numbers evening themselves out because he was ice cold early, red hot now. He's going to end up somewhere in the middle, a very good, very effective goal scoring player that should get around 40 goals.
The Oilers are certainly catching the Panthers at a good time for them. The defending champs have been shut out in back-to-back games. They've gone over 146 minutes without a goal going in.